Okay, we're at the August 2020 block of the month, and this month we're going to be doing the applique petal block. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our shape and cut it out on the solid line in your template. Okay, your fabric pieces, just leave them as they come in the packet. You do not have to trim them. And what you're going to do on each one is trace 3 petal shapes, but make sure that you place them so that you can get a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance around the outer part of the shape. So leave a good 1/2 inch or so between each one and make sure you have enough on each edge. Then you'll take any kind of pen, pencil, if you want to use a Frixion pen, just something to mark the wrong side of the fabric, and I'm drawing around the entire shape. Okay, doesn't have to be super perfect. You're not really going to see it after this. So there I have 3 shapes, and then we're going to take our interfacing piece that we have cut approximately the same size, and we're going to begin with the bubble or the glue side facing up and your fabric right side facing down. So you'll just place that on top of that. And then we're going to stitch on the drawn line. And when I start stitching, I'm going to not start at the point of the petal. I'm going to come in about 1/2 inch and begin stitching right there. Okay, so I'm going to back stitch just a few stitches. You don't have to, and I'm just taking my time and stitching exactly on the drawn line. Okay, and then when I come to the point, I'm going to leave my needle down, lift my presser foot, and pivot my fabric so that I can come back on the next side. And I'm stitching on the drawn line. And I'm coming to the last point there, needle down, pivot, and I'm going to go until I meet my stitches, and I'm going to overlap them a few times. And I've sewn completely around the outer edge. The next thing I'm going to do after I've sewn all my petals is to trim them approximately 1/4 of an inch away from the drawn line. This will give you a little bit of a seam allowance. Okay. And go all the way around. Now on the points, if you want to make it easier, less bulk in the point when you're turning it, you can kind of snip it off at a straight edge like that, just so you leave a little bit of fabric there. Okay, and then you can throw away your scraps. Then what we're going to do is flip it over, and on the interfacing side, we're going to separate the 2 pieces like this, and be very gentle because the interfacing can tear very easily. So pull it apart, and I'm just going to kind of bunch it together just a little bit and make a snip in the interfacing. And I want to get about a 1 to 2 inch size slit, such as that. And then I'm gently going to turn the shape so that the right side of the fabric is now facing out. And be very, very gentle. It's very easy to just poke right through this interfacing. It's very thin interfacing, but this will make it so that there's not so much bulk in your pieces and in your seam. But this type of applique gives you a turned edge. It's not a raw edge applique. So your edge is actually finished in that seam. And now I'm going to use this Clover point turner tool. It's really handy because it has this great point and a nice curved edge, and I'm going to gently insert it into my piece. I'm going to go and place my tip underneath the seam so that it is towards the fabric side. So if we pull this apart, there's going to be an interfacing side and a fabric side, and your seam inside of here, you want to make sure that you're always on the fabric side. So the seam is on top of the point turner, and the point turner is actually right next to the fabric, but underneath the seam. And I'm going to gently poke out the edges, and then I'm going to take that curve and I'm just going to go right along the edge. Again, my point turner is between the seam and the fabric. If you place it on the top side closest to the interfacing, you will just push it right through. So if you keep it always closest to the fabric and just run it all the way along the edge, kind of pushing it out as you go, that will make that nice gentle curve. And I'm just going to continue on pushing that out so that I get a nice curve. And now we don't want to come back and apply any heat at this point, because the sticky side or the glue side of the interfacing is now on the outside. So it would just stick to our iron or stick to the surface that we're ironing on. So one thing that I like to do to get a little bit flat shape is to take a seam roller such as this and just go ahead and put a little bit of pressure on it and roll right over the edge. And that kind of just flattens it out to give you a nice pretty shape before we go attach it to our background fabric. Okay, so I have 4 petals ready to go, and next we're going to head to the ironing board and place them on our fabric. Okay, now I have my background piece and it's cut into a square, and the first thing I want to do is mark some registration lines so I know right where I'm going to be placing my petals. And to do this, I'm going to take this corner and match it up to the opposite corner and give it a gentle crease. I've starched this pretty well, so my crease is going to stay in the fabric, but if you want to, you can take an iron and press that on there. And I don't know if you can see that there is a line there that has formed. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and do the opposite corners to make diagonal lines in both directions from corner to corner. Okay, and now I have a line imprint going here and one going here. My center point is right there. And next I'm going to take my shapes and I'm going to line the corners of the petal right along that line, then I know it's centered. And I have it about 1/8 of an inch away from the center, and I just want to get all my pieces on there and get them positioned before I heat set them. And again, I'm just lining it up on my line, trying to keep it centered on my background piece. Okay, and take a minute to arrange that. If you want them touching in the center, you can. I like to leave mine just a little bit away so I have space in there. They will flatten out a little bit when I press it, and then also when I'm stitching, I want to make sure I have a clear area. So they're almost touching, but not quite. And I think that looks pretty good. So now I'm going to go ahead and with a hot iron, and I'm just going to place it right on to the petal shape. And this is going to flatten my shape and activate the glue on the interfacing that's facing the background fabric. So it will help hold it in place. Now this is a temporary glue that's going to hold it there. As you're moving it around and sewing each piece, you may find that it's not sticking. So what you can do is to go ahead and put a pin. I'm just going to retouch some of these here just to make sure. Now they're very, very flat. I can go ahead and put a pin in the center just so it's held in place, and maybe I want to add a few pins. You could also use like a glue stick. This here is a glue stick that, if not all the edges, you can just place a little bit on there, and then that helps hold it in place until you're ready to stitch it. Okay, we're back at the sewing machine, and we're going to go ahead and I'm going to do a blanket stitch around the edge of the shape to hold it in place. And when I do that, I like to use an open toe foot where it has a wide open space so I can see where my needle is going. Okay, and once again, I'm going to do this red one, but I'm going to start not quite at a point. I'm going to come up here a little ways, about a ½ inch along the side of the shape, and begin my stitching. And my needle is going to start on the outside of the shape in the background fabric. So it's actually right next to the shape, but in the white fabric here. And then it's going to okay, there we go. And it's just doing a single stitch, and I'm just keeping my needle right along the edge of the shape going into the white background fabric. I have used a thread that matches my fabric, so in this instance I'm using a red thread, and then I've changed it for each of the shapes, but you could choose black as a traditional color for applique that can go on all pieces. You could use white, you could do different colors on different fabrics, whatever you choose to do to make it uniquely yours. So I'm just going to keep stitching here. This particular shape has a gentle curve, and I'm not actually stopping a lot to adjust because I can, within the length of the stitch, turn it just the slight amount that it needs to keep following that edge. But when I get to my point up here, okay, I'm going to go a little bit slower and kind of keep track of where my needle has landed, and then raise and lower the presser foot and adjust my fabric as needed to keep my stitches going right along the side of that shape. Now you can choose to do a zigzag stitch, which would go the same kind of, some of it onto your applique piece and some of it onto your background piece. You may choose to do a straight stitch, and in that case you would just probably stitch right onto your shape but next to the edge, so like 1/8 of an inch or so away from the edge, and you just follow the outside of the shape, but you're stitching entirely onto the applique piece if you're doing a straight stitch. Okay, and as I come to the next point, I'm just going to slow down a little bit, and I might have to raise my needle and pivot the fabric. And one more time, and then I'm just going to go up until I meet the set of stitches where I started. And I'm going to back stitch just a few stitches to kind of lock it in place. And then when I pull it out, I can leave my threads a little bit longer, and if I can go ahead and thread them to the back and make a knot there, and then I know that none of my stitches are going to come out. And you can see on the blue piece, I went ahead and used blue thread to stitch that in place. And then the green piece, I used a green thread. So good luck on your applique shapes. You will make 3 blocks that look like this, and have fun sewing. Thanks a lot.